بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. أسأل الله تبارك وتعالى أن يجعل نياتنا خالصة لوجه الكريم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. Inshallah, I remind all of you to share this session. We are continuing in reading our beneficial books. This morning we're going to continue in the book Ahlus, Sunnah, the Ash'aris. And we want to, inshallah, try to get through several books. So I wanted to focus in on this book a little bit more. We will be returning to the book in the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ by Sayyid Muhammad Alawi al-Maliki. We'll be coming back to that. But for the next couple of days, I want to focus in throughout the day of this book, Ahlus Sunnah al-Ash'ari, because we live in a time where emphasis need to be placed on the proper creed of Ahlus Sunnati wal Jama'ah. And I want to share with you some of the books of the ulama of Ahlus Sunnati wal Jama'ah who explained and clarified the creed of Al-Ash'ari. I have something in my mind, especially in the presence of a resurgence of deviant creedal positions in my own area. Which is not just in my area, but it spreads throughout the country and throughout the world. But there is a resurgence of bad ideas and bad concepts in terms of the creed that are being renewed in the Atlantic City area, which we had it kind of subdued, but some people have returned to the area and with that brought their misguided ideas. So I want to deal with them, but deal with them academically. As you know me, I can take someone straight on with no hesitation. But a lot of us are not able to handle that. Even if it's true, we're not able to handle, like, if I could say, up in your face truth. We need truth from a distance. We need some space, right? So maybe the best way to address these issues is to do it with an academic and scholarly approach, and to remain as calm and collective and take all the passion out. because passion we mistake sometimes for anger or emotional, those terms. Since the objective is to teach us, let us try to stick in a way that is suitable for all of us. That doesn't mean every now and then I'm not going to put a little intonation in my speech. I wouldn't be myself if I didn't. But I'm going to try my best to stick to a more moderate tone and expression so that you get the point. Inshallah. Bismillah. So the book Ahlus Sunnah, the Ash'aris, I'm letting you know we only have 2 left. So if you're looking for the book and you've been waiting, there's only 2 books left. It's finished. And I don't know when we will have some more. So I'll put the link for those 2 books. Allahumma. That I left. And inshallah, all of you share. Please, I need to get back. I know I've been missing a lot of classes. So to get back on course, please share and let people know when I'm on, because, that would help them to follow. So we reached up to page 29, and this is the second aspect of refutation by the claims of Al-Wahhabiyya, so-called Salafiyya. And in this, I'm going to name names. So I'm going to name names so you know exactly who I'm talking about. But when I name names, it is in no way to disparage individuals. It is just to clarify who are the proponents of certain ideas, and if those ideas are against the ideas of Ahlus Sunnati wal Jama'ah, Al-Asha'ira wal Maturidiyya, I'm identifying it so you don't be confused. As a point before I go to that, while I'm touching it, whenever Imam Amin Muhammad says Ahlus Sunnati wal Jama'ah, what he means by that in Aqidah, in the creed, he means Al-Asha'ira or Al-Maturidiyya. Whenever he says that, that's what he means. Whenever I utter Ahlus Sunnati wal Jama'ah in belief, what I mean by that, in Aqidah, I mean Al-Asha'ira wal Maturidiyya. If I am talking about someone else or another approach, I will mention it by name. So whenever I say Ahlus Sunnati wal Jama'ah, that's what I mean. I don't mean anything else. There's not when I say Ahlus Sunnati wal Jama'ah, I'm not talking about 3 groups. I'm only talking about 2. Al-Asha'ira wal Maturidiyya. If I'm intending another group, I will mention them by name specifically. So I never say Ahlus Sunnati wal Jama'ah and I mean something other than Al-Asha'ira wal Maturidiyya. That's just a note you should keep, right? So we reached up to the point where the authors were mentioning, did Imam al-Ash'ari die on Aqidah other than the Aqidah he was upon after he made repentance from al-i'tizal or following al-Mu'tazila? Meaning, when he followed the Mu'tazila, did he have one creed or did he go through stages before he reached the creed that he died upon? And the first refutation that the author mentioned was the idea of these three stages, and that Imam al-Ash'ari went through three, one where he was Mu'tazili, one where he was following the way of the people of Kalam, and specifically they mentioned Ibn Kulab, and another when he came upon the way of Ahlus Sunnati wal Jama'ah and the Salaf. And the author debunked that by mentioning that those who related the works of Imam al-Ash'ari and wrote biographies about him, like Abu Bakr ibn Furak and Ibn Khalikan and al-Dhahabi and Ibn Khaldun, none of them mention these three stages. So let us go to page 29 and the second aspect of refuting those ideas. Bismillah.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. Refuting the second premise. First of all, we concede that after he abandoned the doctrine of the Mu'tazila, Imam Abu al-Hasan, rahimahullah, followed the way of Abdullah bin Sa'id al-Kullab. We agreed with the claimants in this part of the premise. However, they differ with us regarding Ibn Kullab's way. We believe that his path and the path of the Salaf was one of reality, because Ibn Kullab...
One in reality, meaning when you examine the creed of Ibn Kullab and the creed of the Salaf, and here when you say Salaf, you're talking about as-Sahaba, the companions, the followers of the companions, at-Tabi'un, and the followers of the companions, atba' at-Tabi'in. And then even if that's by generations, if you talk about time, remember we said everyone who lived in the first 300 years. So when you separate those who lived in the first 300 years, but in the latter time of that, the latter period, after like 220, say, then you're talking about, when you say Salaf, you're talking about the first three succeeding generations by people, not time. So sometimes when you say as Salaf, you mean succeeding people, the companions, the followers of the followers. Then in another way, you say as Salaf, you can mean by generations, time, which is like 100 years, as a scholar said. So that'll be everybody in the first 300 years. Also, you can use the term Salaf, and many people are not aware of this, so let me make you aware of it. When you say as Salaf, you can also mean anybody who preceded you. So anyone who preceded you, who came before you, they are your Salaf. So different groups will use the Salaf to mean different things. So whenever you use the term as Salaf, you should understand who you are talking about. It's very important. Don't just say, we're on the way of the Salaf. What Salaf? Who are you talking about? Identify them. And this is very important. So whenever you say as Salaf, make sure you know who you're talking about. Because when you use titles and terminology, if we're talking about different things, that's going to be confusing just because we have different understanding of I'm sorry. Give me 1 second. We have a troll in here. So whenever you're talking, and this is important in any discussion when you're talking about Islam, whenever you use terms, whenever you use titles, make sure you clarify what you mean, so that when you're talking to somebody, you're talking about the same thing, right? So when we talk about Salaf, are we talking about the companions, the followers, or the followers of the followers? Are we talking about anyone who lived in the first three generations? Are we talking about your forefathers on your methodology that came after the first 300 years? Are you talking about your relatives? What are we talking about here? It's very important. Here, when it's mentioned as Salaf, is those who lived in the first three succeeding generations from the companions, the followers, and the followers of the followers. Ibn Kulab would be counted among the Salaf in time. Go ahead.
Ibn Kulab was among the Imams of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, and he followed the path of the pious predecessors.
See, now it's putting him as Ahlus Sunnati wal Jama'ah, and this is prior to Imam al-Ash'ari, right? So therefore, Ahlus Sunnati wal Jama'ah here is meant those who follow the way of the Prophet ﷺ, and they made up the majority of the Muslim nation. The methodology in their creed was adopted and codified and structured in a concise way by Imam al-Ash'ari, and it became known as the Ash'ari school, as well as Imam Abu Mansur and Maturidi, and it became known as the Maturidi school. It is the same creed. The difference is it being codified and structured in an organized form.
At-Taj as-Subki said, rahimahullah, in any case, Ibn Kulab is from Ahl Sunnah. I saw that Imam Diya ad-Din al-Khatib, the father of Imam Fakhr ad-Din al-Razi, rahimahullah.
Fakhruddin al-Razi, highlight him, because when we go and discuss Ibn Taymiyyah, one of the great scholars that we're going to discuss is Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi. Fakhruddin al-Razi, he died in the year 606 after Hijrah. He came after Imam al-Ghazali. Sheikh Fakhruddin al-Razi was one of the great Ash'ari scholars who refuted al-Mujassima, those who gave Allah bodily attributes, and al-Mushabbiha, those who liken Allah to his creation in his time. He was the strongest scholar among Ahlus Sunnati wal Jama'ah in the beginning of the 7th century, in refuting those people of misguidance, especially the Mujassima and Mushabbiha. And he is the focal point of Ibn Taymiyyah's disagreement with Ahlus Sunnati wal Jama'ah. So the one he focuses on when he is putting forth his misguided claims of which lead to tajsim and tashbih, anthropomorphism, and resembling Allah to the creation, the foremost person that he targets is the great Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi. So we're going to cover his works and points that he raised in future lessons. So keep that name as a point.
He mentioned Abdullah bin Sa'id bin Kullab at the end of his book, Ghaya al-Maram fi Ilm al-Kalam. He wrote, among the Sunni theologians during the reign of al-Ma'mun was Abdullah bin Sa'id at-Tamimi, who demolished the Mu'tazila and the gathering of al-Ma'mun and exposed them with his rhetorical skills.
So you would notice how Imam Diya al-Khatib talked about Ibn Kulab. He said he is from the Mutakallimun of Ahl Sunnah, those theologians of Ahl Sunnah. How did he describe him? Ahl Sunnah. And he described him as destroying al-Mu'tazila. So he didn't describe him as other than Ahl Sunnah. And it is extremely important that we understand this. Go ahead.
Al-Hafidh ibn Asakir, may Allah have mercy upon him, said,
The famous book of Al-Hafidh ibn Asakir, is his book mentioned here?
No. Mm-mm.
The book of Ibn Asakir is called Tibyin al-Kadhib al-Muftari. Tibyin Kadhib al-Muftari, clarifying the lie of the fabricator. This book was written to defend Imam al-Ash'ari from the false accusations that were mentioned about him.
I read a letter from the handwriting of the Hadith scholar of Egypt, Ali bin Baqa al-Waraq, that was written by the Maliki jurist Abu Muhammad Abdullah bin Abi Zayd al-Qarawani, who was the leading scholar of Malik school in the Maghrib during his time. He wrote it to Ali bin Ahmad bin Ismail al-Baghdadi al-Mu'tazili as a response to a letter written by the latter to the Malikis of Qarawain, in which he offered them advice that would convert them to the Mu'tazila doctrine. Within the letter, produced in full by Ibn Asakir, rahimahullah, it reads, "And you attributed him to innovation, then you did not mention a statement from him that can be identified as an innovation or be used to call him an innovator. We know of no one who has accused Ibn Kullab of innovation. What has reached us is that he closely follows the Sunnah and takes it upon himself to refute the Jahmiyyah and other innovators." Footnote, Tabyin Kadhib al-Muftari.
Yes. Now, this is Ibn Abi Zayd al-Qayrawani, who was the famous Maliki scholar. He's mentioned Ibn Kullab as Ahlus Sunnah, and that he wrote against Al-Jahmiyyah. Al-Jahmiyyah, you should get this name, were the followers of a deviant man who denied Allah's attributes during the time of as-Salaf. They are Jaham ibn Safwan, that's his name. What the Wahhabiyya in our time, so-called Salafiyya, they accuse the Ash'aris and like Ibn Kullab of being Jahmiyyah, saying that they deny Allah's attributes. And as you can see here, they actually refuted the Jahmiyyah. So you'll hear, whenever you hear Jahmiyyah in their books, those Wahhabi or Salafi books, what they're really talking about is not the Jahmiyyah in the past. They took that name and applied it to the Ash'aris, unrightfully. So when you study history, you'll see the false claims of Al-Wahhabiyya and As-Salafiyya. And I want to clarify, I don't say Salafi, I say Wahhabi. Because the ascription of Salafi, trying to say they follow the Salaf, is not true. It is a false claim. It is a claim, but they don't follow the way of a Salaf, which we will clarify quickly, inshallah. So I don't say Salafi. You won't hear me saying Salafi. I'll say Wahhabi. Because the creed of these people today that say they're Salafi is the Wahhabi creed. And if you read their structure of teaching, the so-called Salafis, the books that they mandate that you read in Aqidah in the beginning of your studies are the books of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. I'm going to repeat that. The Salafis that we see today that claim to follow the way of a Salaf are Wahhabis. The evidence of that is if you study their curriculum of books in Aqidah that you should study, the first stages of their books are the books of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. That is their curriculum. The books of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, then the books of Ibn Taymiyyah. That's a step. So I don't say Salafi, call them by their real name, Wahhabi. Right? If they are Salafi, then they're not following the books of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. They're not actually following the books of Ibn Taymiyyah. They're following the books of Salaf. That's another discussion. As for what we hear and what we see, they are Wahhabis. And the evidence is that they follow the books of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. So keep that in mind when I mention it for clarification purposes. Go ahead.
This is a powerful testimony from Imam Ibn Abi Zayd, rahimahullah, regarding Ibn Kullab and his close adherence to the Sunnah and refutations against the innovators, and that he knew of no one who accused him of innovation. Sheikh Muhammad.
Why is this important? Highlight the name Ibn Abi Zayd al-Qayrawani, al-Maliki. Why is it important? Because those same Wahhabis tried to explain his book. His book, he wrote a famous book in Maliki fiqh called Risala Ibn Abi Zayd. All the Malikis know this book. It's a famous book. The first part of that book is about Aqidah. The Wahhabis, they take that portion of the book and they explain the book, because he was an early scholar, they explain the book according to their methodology. And they take certain problematic statements that seems to support their things, that it's in that creed, and they use it to say he was upon their path. And if you study the classical commentaries on a Risala of Ibn Abi Zayd by the Maliki scholars, who were by far Ash'ari in creed, you'll see the major book commentaries on the Risala that are not written by Wahhabis do not explain that creed in that way. So by Ibn Abi Zayd mentioning the statement of the position of Ibn Kullab as following the Sunnah and refuting the innovators, and that he cannot be attributed with violent innovation, is a proof against those Wahhabis who claim that Ibn Abi Zayd was on their way when he praised someone whom they said was deviant. So obviously they don't have the same creed. And when I'm saying this, I'll show you. And that's the academic part. I'm going to show you the books of how the Wahhabis are altering books, falsely claiming to follow scholars who disagreed with them altogether. And this is an example of that.
Sheikh Muhammad Zahid, rahimahullah, Al-Kawthari commented on this in his edition of Tabyin Kadhib al-Muftari.
Muhammad Zahid al-Kawthari was one of the great scholars from the end of the Ottoman period, who was exiled and left to Egypt. And he is one of the great, in his time, he was one of the strongest Sunni scholars against the Wahhabi movement. And he wrote introductions to many of the classical books of the Ash'aris that refuted ideas of anthropomorphism and resembling Allah to his creation.
He was the Imam of the Sunni theologians during the time of Ahmad, and he used to keep the company of Al-Harith ibn Asad. Some people
Al-Harith ibn Asad al-Muhasibi, the great Imam of the Sufis. So I want you to you'll start identifying people. And Al-Harith al-Muhasibi, he lived during the time of Imam Ahmad, and he was the Sheikh of Junaid al-Baghdadi, who was known as Ra'is al-Qawm, the leader of the Sufis, Sayyid al-Ta'ifa, the master of the group. Al-Harith al-Muhasibi was the sheikh of Imam Junaid. And Ibn Kulab was in that time, as Al-Kawthari mentioned.
Some people who are weak in theology attack him. Al-Kawthari then proceeded to examine the issues that caused some to attack him, and he explained how those issues are not distant from the sacred law and the intellect.
And here's the point. As we're talking about Aqidah, but there is the indication that the people of Sufism, the Sufis, were on the same Aqidah as the scholars of Hadith. They were all following the methodology of Ahlus Sunnah, which later became technically identified and codified as Al-Asha'ira wal-Maturidiyya. When you study the content, it was the same. And here, that's why I said don't get lost in names so much. You need the names to identify, but get into content. What does those titles represent? What is their creed? And as we discuss, you'll start to see the connection, because the Sufis were following the way of Al-Ash'ari. The Sufis were Ash'ari in creed. Sufism is the spirituality aspect from Al-Ihsan in the Hadith of Jibril. And then they were following madhabs in fiqh. And they were following the creed after Imam al-Ash'ari and Imam Abu Mansur in the middle of the 4th century. Abu Mansur al-Maturidi, they were following them after the mid 4th century. Prior to that, it's known as Ahlus Sunnati wal Jama'ah, and the creed is the same until the codification of those two great imams. And they were Sufis, which is indicated in the Risala of Abu al-Qasim al-Kushairi, who wrote the major treatise on the people of Tasawwuf, and he mentioned firstly their statements in Aqidah. And their statements in Aqidah, among those were the statements of Junaid, who was the student of Al-Harith al-Muhasibi, who actually was at the same time and on the same methodology as Ibn Kulab, as mentioned by Imam al-Kawthari.
Ibn Qadi Shuhba said he was one of the major theologians and he was from Ahlus Sunnah. His path and the path of Al-Harith al-Muhasibi were followed by Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari.
Right? So here you'll see, even though they were before Imam al-Ash'ari, because they were in the 3rd century, Imam al-Ash'ari followed the same exact way. So you have a theologian, Ibn Kulab. You have a famous Sufi, Al-Harith al-Muhasibi. And Al-Harith al-Muhasibi wrote the famous book, which we will study, Risalatul Mustashideen, the treatise of the seekers of guidance, which is in Tasawwuf, right? So you got Aqidah, you got Sufism, and you have Imam al-Ash'ari following the same path. So here's another false claim. And please wake up from this false claim. The Wahhabiyya try to make like Sufis is some different group. Sufi, Ash'ari is all one. Ash'ari is in creed. Then you follow one of the 4 schools, and then you follow the path of Tasawwuf. That whole all three sciences, those primary sciences of Aqidah, Fiqh, and Tasawwuf, are one for every Sunni Muslim. The Sunni Muslim has a methodology in Aqidah, a methodology in Fiqh, and follows the way of Sufism, Tasawwuf. That's a Sunni. A real Sunni Muslim has all 3 components. So all of these great scholars who were from the Salaf, they follow this way. They were from the Salaf. We're not talking about Ibn Taymiyyah. We're not talking about Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah. We're not talking about Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. We're talking about the scholars who lived during the time of the Salaf. Not only they lived during the time of the Salaf, they were the Imams of the Salaf. Not only they lived during the time, they were the leaders of the Salaf in every time. And this is important to understand, because when you don't know the Salaf and it's just speech and a title without real knowledge, then you don't even know who the Salaf were. So you're making claims against yourself. But here, all these people lived in the time of the Salaf. So we're not talking about someone who came 400 years after the Salaf, or then another 1,000 years after the Salaf, 1,300 years after the Salaf, talking about we follow the Salaf. Look.
Jamal ad-Din al-Isnawi said he was one of the major theologians and he was from Ahlus Sunnah. Al-Abadi mentioned him in the rank of Abu Bakr as-Sayrafi and said he is one of our companions among the theologians. Footnote.
So here these are all Shafi'i, Ash'ari scholars, Ibn Qadi Shuhba, Al-Isnawi, and these are in their books of Tabaqat. They're Tabaqat al-Shafi'iyya, so they're the biographies of the Shafi'i scholars, the different ranks and levels. And they're all identifying Ibn Qulab as what? Ahl-Sunnati wal-Jama'ah.
Footnote. Tabaqat al-Shafi'iyya al-Isnawi. Imam Dhahabi said, rahimahullah, the man is the closest of the theologians to the Sunnah. Nay, he is among their debaters. Footnote, Siyar Alam al-Nubala. Sheikh Shu'aib al-Arnaut commented on this.
Shu'aib al-Arnaut is a famous hadith scholar. He passed in our time, and he is a muhakkik, an editor. So he's famous for editing books and researching books.
Commented on this in his edition of Al-Dhahabi's Siyar. He was the Imam of Ahlus Sunnah and its reference in his time. Imam al-Haramain al-Juwayni described him in Al-Irshad, saying, he is from our companions.
And Al-Irshad by Imam al-Juwayni is a book in Aqidah. Imam al-Juwayni, Imam al-Haramain, was the Sheikh of Imam al-Ghazali. He was the Sheikh of Imam al-Ghazali. And he was the Imam of Al-Madrasatu Nizamiyya in Naysabur. So he was a great, great Ash'ari scholar, well known. And how did he describe Ibn Qulab? He described بِأَنَّهُ مِنْ أَصْحَابِنَا, that he is from our companions, right?
We have already mentioned the statement of Ibn Khaldun. He held the views of Abdullah bin Sa'id bin Kulab, Abu al-Abbas al-Qalanisi, and al-Harith al-Muhasibi among the followers of the Salaf and the path of the Sunnah.
Read that back again. When Ibn Khaldun talks about the history of the scholars, he said, Ila an dhahara Sheikh Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari. Up until the time when Sheikh Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari appeared, and he said, now he's explaining Imam al-Ash'ari, he said, wa kana ala ra'yi Abdullah bin Sa'id al-Kulab. Read that again.
He held the views of Abdullah bin Sa'id bin Kulab, Abu al-Abbas al-Qalanisi, and al-Harith al-Muhasibi among the followers of the Salaf.
So how did he describe all of them, Ibn Khaldun? He described them as among the followers of the Salaf. And go ahead.
Here he described him as a follower of the Salaf and that Imam al-Ash'ari held his views and the views of al-Qalanisi and al-Muhasibi, all followers of the Salaf and upon the way of the Sunnah.
So now we're talking now, remember time. This is in the mid-3rd century. All of them died. They were at the same time of Imam Ahmed. So you're talking about the years 240 and a little bit after that. That's their time. So they're before Imam al-Ash'ari, before Imam al-Maturidi. They're described as Ahl Sunnah and followers of the Salaf by the people who were the greatest historians in Islamic history. So when the real scholarly historians who reported Islam, they described them as Ahl Sunnah and followers of the Salaf. And then you find these Wahhabis today who claim to follow the Salaf, calling them misguided. Something got to give here. Those who were closest to this time of the Salaf, those who were recognized by the historians as being the followers of the Salaf and on the way of Ahlus Sunnati wal Jama'ah, on the way of the Sunnah, right? And today we have these innovators, these vile innovators, Al-Wahhabiyya, so-called Salafiyya, considering all of them misguided. Something ain't right historically. The historic record don't reflect that. So this modern revisionist approach to our scholars and our belief needs to be highlighted, especially in our community where we don't have access to scholarship. We don't know scholarship. Actually, they're replacing these traditional scholars with the likes of Bin Baz and Ibn Uthaymeen and Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab and Al-Albani and on and on and on. And the only thing closest to the Salaf that they rely upon in time, which is still 400 years after the time of the Salaf, is Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah. But the real scholars of the Salaf that were mentioned in the Salaf, if you study their works, if you study their books, if you study what the historians say about them, they're so far away from this Wahhabi creed as far as the sun is from the earth.
Allama Kamal al-Din al-Bayadi, rahimahullah, said, that is because al-Maturidi detailed the doctrine of Imam Abu Hanifa.
Al-Bayadi was a Hanafi scholar who wrote his book, Isharat al-Maram min Ibarat al-Imam, which is Imam Abu Hanifa. So he mentioned Imam Abu Hanifa's positions in Aqidah. So that's why he's talking about Maturidi, because the Hanafis follow the Maturidi school in Aqidah. Go ahead.
That is because al-Maturidi detailed the doctrine of Imam Abu Hanifa and his Sunni companions who appeared before al-Ash'ari. There has never been an era bereft of those who aid and manifest the religion. He, al-Ash'ari, was also preceded in that, aiding the doctrine of Ahlus Sunnah, by Imam Abu Muhammad Abdullah bin Sa'id al-Qattan.
That is Ibn Kulab. This is the same person. Abdullah bin Sa'id al-Qattan is Ibn Kulab.
In other words, Imam Ibn Kullab preceded Imam Abu al-Hasan in aiding the religion and manifesting the Sunnah.
Right. Now listen to this. So one of the slogans of these Wahhabis today are what? We're on the Sunnah. We're upon the Sunnah. As if no one knew the Sunnah before them. And in fact, they wouldn't know anything about the Sunnah if they didn't hijack the books of our scholars and then change them and put their vile ideas in it. Yet they took those great scholars from the Salaf, whom they mentioned were the people of the Sunnah, and they manifested the Sunnah, supported the Deen, and they flipped the whole script. I want to give you an example of this by analogy. All of you know history, right? One would think the way they promote it, that the natives never had this land in America. The white men were invaders. They wiped them out, took the land, and then redid the history so that they were the founding fathers of a land they stole from others. The Wahhabis did the same thing with religion. They came, they pillaged and killed and murdered the Muslims in the land of Al-Hijaz. They took it, took the books, rearranged them, restructured them, took out what they wanted to take out, added what they wanted to add it, then gave it to the people as if the land was always Saudi Arabia under their doctrine. And now that's the Sunnah. It's the same thing. We should be aware of this. Same thing. Pillage a land, kill its people, then redefine history so that you're the hero. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. So all these names are very important, and we may have to go over it several times, but what I want to do is also eventually is show you all these books, the original sources, so you can see that it is consistent what is in actually the books. Now,
In other words, Imam Ibn Kullab preceded Imam Abu al-Hasan in aiding the religion and manifesting the Sunnah. Al-Hafidh Ibn Hajar said in his biography.
Al-Hafiz ibn Hajar here, very important highlight, is Al-Hafiz ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, Amirul Mu'mineen fil Hadith. This quote is coming from his book, Lisan al-Mizan. He mentioned biographies in that book of narrators. Now, go ahead.
In his biography of Ibn Kullab, after mentioning the statement of Ibn al-Nadim, who was a Mu'tazili, he was from the Hashiwi Rifraf. What he means is that a Hashiwi is whoever is upon the way of the Salaf by abandoning figurative interpretation of the verses and hadith reports about the divine attributes. They are also called the people of non-specific interpretation, or mufawwilah.
Here, so this is a very important thing to understand. And this is a fine point. I won't go in detail. And this is why we say Fudala al-Hanabila, or the noble Hanbalis. And we count them as Ahlus Sunnati wal Jama'ah. They were those, in those days, if a scholar didn't make a ta'wil and they preferred a tafweed, they didn't consider them, they considered them against the people of Kalam in a way. And what they meant by that, as Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani mentioned here, is that they just related the text of the Quran and Sunnah in the Arabic language as they came and made a full stop. They didn't indulge into them, right? And anyone who indulged in them, they wasn't really fond of that. And these are two approaches, and valid approaches, right? So you should distinguish between the two. That's why I said terminology. So that's why Al-Hafiz ibn Hajar Asqalani, he clarified terminology. What is meant here is this, not what you think. Because if you hear a word, sometimes you may think the wrong thing if you don't know how it's being applied, right? And that's very important. So following the way of non-specific interpretation, a tafweed is a position of Ahlus Sunnati wal Jama'ah. That is the position of the upright, noble Hanbalis who are from Ahlus Sunnati wal Jama'ah.
Imam al-Shahrastani said, rahimahullah, until the time of Abdullah bin Sa'id al-Kullab, Abu al-Abbas al-Qalanisi, al-Harith bin Asad al-Muhasibi, they were from the generality of the Salaf. However, they engaged in speculative theology.
Shahrastani, in his book, Al-Milal wa Nihal, he's talking about groups, how he defends them as they are from the people of as-Salaf, right? Go ahead.
However, they engaged in speculative theology and aided the doctrines of the Salaf with theological proofs and rational evidence. Some of them wrote books and some of them taught. Then there was the debate that took place between Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari and his teacher regarding the issue of
Al-Juba'i. Al-Juba'i was the sheikh of the Mu'tazila in the time of Imam al-Ash'ari.
Then there was the debate that took place between Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari and his teacher regarding the issue of best interest, as-salah wal-aslah. They debated and al-Ash'ari then switched camps and assisted their Sunni doctrine with theological methods, and it became a school of Ahlus Sunnah, and the term Ash'ariyya replaced the term Sifatiyya.
Now, so you see, they had the same creed, but the work of Imam al-Ash'ari was supplying proofs, evidences, codifying, summarizing, clarifying till it became a madhab. And when he said, وَصَارَ ذَلِكَ مَذْهَبًا لِأَهْلِ السُنَّةِ وَالْجَمَاعَةِ. How did he explain Ash'ari's work? وَصَارَ ذَلِكَ مَذْهَبًا لِأَهْلِ السُنَّةِ وَالْجَمَاعَةِ. And that became a madhab for Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And that's how the scholars became known as Al-Ash'ariyah. They were what? Ahl Sunnah. Here you find these Wahhabi people talking about, and this is back in the early days. I'm following the way of the scholars who were mentioned to be from the Salaf. And here those Wahhabis come today and say that the Ash'aris are not Ahl Sunnah.
We will go further and say that not only was Imam al-Ash'ari upon the methodology of Ibn Kullab, but it was also the same doctrine of the major Imams like Imam al-Bukhari, rahimahullah. Al-Hafidh Ibn...
Now I'm going to show you that Ash'ari was the way of Ibn Kullab. So was Imam al-Bukhari having the same aqidah. The word that was replaced is as-sifatiyya. As-sifatiyya meaning those who dealt with the attributes of Allah. So in the early books, you'll see that.
Al-Hafidh Ibn Hajar, rahimahullah, said, in all that al-Bukhari cited concerning...
And this is in his book, Fathul Bari, in the explanation of Imam al-Bukhari. Al-Bukhari.
In all that al-Bukhari cited concerning the explanation of rare words, he quoted from the people of that science, such as Abu Ubaidah al-Nadir bin Shumail, al-Nadhr bin Shumail, al-Farah, and others. As for the matters of jurisprudence, most of it is taken from Ash-Shafi'i, Abu Ubaid, and their likes. As for the matters of theology, Masa al-Kalamiyya, most of it is taken from al-Karabisi, Ibn Kullab, and their likes. All of these citations clearly show that
Ibn Hajar is the most famous explainer of the Sahih of al-Bukhari. And he has one of the strongest chains going back to Imam al-Bukhari. And he mentioned that the creedal statements of Imam al-Bukhari were in line with Ibn Kullab.
All of these citations clearly show that Imam Abdullah bin Sa'id bin Kullab was upon the way of the Salaf and the Sunnah.
Allahu Akbar. Now keep in mind, why is this point being raised? Because those Wahhabiyya tried to say that Imam al-Ash'ari went through 3 stages. And the stage where he was following Ibn Kullab, where he was misguided. And then at the end of his life, he became Salafi. Meaning on the way of their deviant doctrine, which all the scholars are reflecting as false. And all you got to do is study the books. This stuff going to fall right apart. When you start reading the original texts of our scholars, those real books from the time of the Salaf, that Wahhabi stuff going to fall right apart quick. It don't stand up at all in the face of, like, you got to be blind or just not read, one or the other, or arrogant, like an obstinate denier. If you read the books of the scholars, that stuff don't hold weight. That's why they change the scholars. It's a reason why they only want you to read certain books. Why? Because if you read real books, real sources, original sources, you're going to start to find out that that stuff don't hold up. It don't make no sense. Not at all. It's cut and paste at its finest. It's no consistency when you study the real books. Globally and historically, it can't stand up. Not that hardline doctrine. That's why now, just as a side point, that's why now you find a lot of these people, they're trying to soften the Wahhabi way, remove the name Wahhabi, remove the name Salafi now, because Salafi people is being exposed. So now they move to Athari and Hanbali with the same ideas, though. You got to watch these jokers, as Imam Naim said. You have Al-Wahhabiyya. Once that's exposed, Salafiyya. Now that's being exposed, Athariyya, Hanabila. But when you get under the covers of the names, it's the same stuff being refurbished over and over again. So forget all those names. Let's go get the stuff and remove the disease, which is bad creed, innovated creed. Let's remove that, and you can keep the name after that. You want to be Salafi, you want to be Athari, you want to be Hanbali, fine. Let's get rid of the bad stuff and leave what is good.
What were the accusations against Ibn Kullab? If the Imams clarified this matter, then why was Abdullah ibn Sa'id bin Kullab accused of opposing the way of the Salaf? Ibn Abdul Barr explained a bit about this.
Al-Maliki. He was a famous Maliki scholar.
Explained a bit about this in his biographical notice for Al-Karabisi. He said, there was a strong friendship between him, meaning Al-Karabisi, and Ahmad ibn Hanbal, but when the former opposed the latter regarding the Quran, their friendship turned into enmity. Both of them would speak ill about the other. This is because Ahmad used to say, whoever says that the Quran is created is a Jahmi. Whoever says that the Quran is the speech of Allah but does not say that it is uncreated or created is waqifi, hesitant. And whoever says my pronunciation of the Quran is created is an innovator. Now Al-Karabisi, Abdullah bin Kullab, Abu Thawr, Dawood bin Ali, and their rank used to say that the Quran spoken by Allah is an attribute among his attributes and cannot be created. The recitation of the reader and his speaking with the Quran is his own acquisition and action that is created and is a hikayah or narration of Allah's speech. The Hanbali companions of Ahmad ibn Hanbal said,
narration, you can also say an expression.
the Hanbali companions of Ahmad ibn Hanbal had forsaken Al-Karabisi, declared him an innovator, and spoke ill about both him and all who spoke with his belief in that matter.
Why? Because there was narration stop. They didn't want any extra explanation. So what they were censoring was the extra explanation. The Hanbali school is impossible to be a true Hanbali and translate verses of the Quran and Hadith. Write that down. It is impossible to be a true Hanbali and translate verses of the Quran and Hadith about Allah's attributes. Can y'all please write that down and put it in the box? I want everyone to type that. Please, it's very important. It is impossible, the fast typers, it is impossible to be a true Hanbali and translate the verses related to the attributes of Allah in the Quran and the Hadith. It's impossible. If someone write it quick, the fast typers, I'm not among them. Whoever types fast, just put it in the chat. It is impossible to be a real Hanbali, a true Hanbali, and translate the verses and hadith related to the attributes. That's impossible. It don't match. The claims are in opposition. What do I mean by that? This is a very important point, and I want to pause here for a minute. Imam Ahmed's approach, thank you, Isa. That's why you're a sheikh. Where you at? Right? It's impossible to be a true Hanbali and translate the verses and hadith related to the attributes. Why? Because the Mufawwida, those who leave the meaning of to Allah They just recite the verse as it was revealed, or the hadith of the Prophet as it came, full stop. They don't talk about it. They don't comment on it. None of that. Please listen closely. So for Imam Ahmed, not in every case, we're going to learn where he made detailed ta'wil himself, as mentioned by Imam al-Bayhaqi, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. But in general, the Hanbali school, the true followers of Imam Ahmed, that was their approach. Recite the verses. And we're talking about the attributes of Allah here, with no interpretation. Whatever Allah revealed, it is as he said, and he doesn't resemble his creation. Full stop. No more discussion. The hadith that the Prophet ﷺ said, as it was confirmed from him, recited in Arabic as the Prophet said it, full stop. Allah is not like his creation. Is this point clear for everyone? Please engage me. I want you to understand that, because there's a trick being played on you that you're not aware of, a lot of you. So the Wahhabis are tricking you with this. So let's remove that trick. The true Hanbali school and the position of Imam Ahmed, in most cases, with rare exceptions, there are rare exceptions, and we'll mention them later, but we're talking about his overall approach, is to recite the verse as Allah revealed it in the Arabic language, no adding, no subtracting, full stop, and with acknowledging that Allah is not like his creation. Whenever it was a hadith that mentioned the attributes of Allah, recite it in Arabic as the Prophet recited, affirm it, that is true. If it is authentic, full stop. Allah is not like his creation. Does everyone got that? There's no discussion. They're not having a discussion. So what Imam Ahmed would get censor anyone who would go beyond that and have a discussion, Imam Ahmed considered that an innovation. Don't go beyond that. Allah said this, stop. He's not like his creation. We have nothing else to talk about. Once you translate, you have left the madhab of Imam Ahmed. Once you take the Arabic word and put it in any other language, you have left the school of Imam Ahmed. Does everyone understand that? If you recite a hadith and you translate it to another language, any language, or even in Arabic, give it another wording in Arabic other than what the Prophet said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or ever what Allah revealed, that's innovation. And it's not accepted in their school. Do y'all understand the strictness of that? So no true Hanbali, nor would Imam Ahmed say Allah has a hand. They won't recite the verse, Yadallahi fawqa aydihim, and then in Arabic, Persian, Farsi, any other language, then go say Allah has a hand, Allah's hands is above their hands. They would never do that. They would say, Yadallahi fawqa aydihim, laysa kamithlihi shay. Stop. Full stop. No conversation. You couldn't drag them into a conversation about that. Do y'all follow this? Is this clear? So those unlearned, ignorant Wahhabis who claim to follow Imam Ahmed, or so-called Salafis, or so-called Atharis, or so-called Hanbalis, who keep translating the attributes of Allah in another language, are deviating from the way of Imam Ahmed. Do y'all understand this? And once you understand that, you'll see. So when we say, no, that's Wahhabi stuff, because that's not the madhab of Imam Ahmed. That's not the madhab of Imam Ahmed. That is Wahhabi stuff under the name of the Hanbali school, under the name of Athari, under the name of Salafi. That's Wahhabi stuff. Do y'all follow me? I hope I'm being clear. Because there's a whole nother innovation happening that this is something the Ummah has never seen. What's going on today? This is a whole new thing. This now changing names, soften the approach, and then reinventing a whole new creed that we never heard of and making it acceptable as Ahlus Sunnati wal Jama'ah. And unfortunately, a lot of our Sunni people who are not trained in Aqidah, let me add this point. We have a lot of our brothers among Ahlus Sunnah who are Ahlus Sunnah, but they're not trained in Aqidah. So they are making the mistake because of their lack of knowledge in the field of Aqidah. They may be good in Tasawwuf, they may be good in fiqh, they may be good in Arabic language, they may be good in Sirah, but miserable in issues of Aqaid. They don't know how to talk, they don't know how to express themselves, not because they're bad people. That's not their field. They didn't learn it well. They just learned the basic belief, they know it, but they never were confronted with its opposition, right? So therefore, when the opposite comes, they're confused. They don't know how to explain. And the way the Wahhabi have been able to cover themselves is because the person they're talking to doesn't know Aqidah of Ahlus Sunnati wal Jama'ah well himself. He's knowledgeable, maybe in Hadith, maybe in fiqh, maybe in Tasawwuf, but he's not knowledgeable in Aqidah. And you shouldn't take Aqidah from him because he doesn't know it. He knows the basics, but details, evidences, he don't know. He cannot express at all. And if he tries to go in that area, he's going to make mistakes because he doesn't know. Not because he's a bad person. It's not his field of study. Do y'all understand that? I'm talking strictly academic. And if you talk to some of our people, they'll tell you they didn't study Aqidah well. That's why when they're confronted with the Wahhabis, they can't handle them because they didn't know Aqidah well. If you ask them, what books in Aqidah you sat with a sheikh and covered from cover to cover, you're going to find not much. That wasn't their focus, right? But say, okay, give me the books you studied with your teacher, word for word, cover to cover, with explanation, with a chain of narration. Crickets. Not because they're bad. This is not your field. So if you talk outside your field, of course, you're going to be weak. That's not what you studied. That's like a doctor trying to talk about law. Is it going to work? He's a professional doctor, a specialist. He's not going to go in the courtroom and defend you, is he? He may talk about medicine. That's it. But if he's talking about law and jurisprudence, he can talk about that. That's not his field. That doesn't mean he's not a specialist as a doctor. So maybe you're good in Tasawwuf. Maybe you're good in Hadith. Maybe you're good in fiqh. Maybe you're good in Sirah. But if we talk about issues of Aqidah, you're going to make mistakes. So you're not the one to talk about this issue. So if the Wahhabi's sitting next to you, he's going to get away with it all day because you don't even know how to refute him. You don't even realize what he's saying is wrong because that's not your field. Do y'all understand that? I mean, it's very important. We're going kind of in because the only way we're going to overcome this problem is that somebody educate us. All of us, we have to be educated. So sometimes you may see like very few people talking about these issues because very few people really study them, right? Especially among African Americans. Very few that can actually, because unfortunately, a lot of us were Wahhabi before we became Sunni. Let me repeat that. Unfortunately, a lot of us, especially in the African American community, who are now Sunni, were previously Wahhabi. So we still got traces from that Wahhabi stuff. And when we talk, it's like, because we never sat and really learned and got all that Wahhabi stuff out. Some of it still exists, traces. You know, if you're sick, you had COVID, for instance, traces from COVID will exist. Like now, I had COVID. My breathing is rough. How long you can hold some sounds and, you know, you lose breath. It's very difficult. the traces of COVID. You follow my point? So same are those bad creeds. The traces, it take a long time to get out of that stuff, right? So all these are factors in our understanding. And we should understand that in terms of why we find sometimes some people won't talk about issues. You can't. That's why you ain't talking about it. It's not that the issue's wrong. You just ain't the one to talk about it. And that's fine. You should leave it to its people. Those who understand it better than you. And they should be the ones to deal with that. Is my point clear here? And that doesn't mean anything bad about such people. That's just not their area. They should stick in their area and get other people who's more skilled than them in the other area. Tayyip, go ahead. Let me just make sure. Is this issue clear for everyone? Everyone follow that? Okay, go ahead.
This is the reason why Abdullah ibn Kullab was rebuked and why some said he was not upon the way of the Sunnah and the Salaf. This matter becomes even clearer if we understand that these Imams engaged in speculative theology in order to refute the opponents and expose their deviancy. Now, Ahmed used to.
When they say speculative theology, this is called ilm al-kalam. And as I said, terminology is very important. Ilm al-kalam here is a method of using textual proofs from the Quran and Sunnah along with intellectual proofs to establish the creed of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah in the face of deviation. So they take two approaches. One, the text of the Quran and Sunnah. And this is related to the attributes of Allah, of course, right? And in addition to that, they supply strong intellectual proofs, right? So you have Dalil al-Naqli, textual proofs, and Dalil al-Aqli, intellectual proofs. That's how the people of who deal with the ilm al-kalam. So when Sunnis say ilm al-kalam, it is synonymous with ilm usul al-din, ilm al-tawheed, ilm al-aqidah, and ilm al-kalam. They're synonymous, but when you talk about it as a science, it is more detailed. But in general, it's synonymous with the creed of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. So when they speaking of the scholars of Kalam, they're talking about their approach, not the foundation of their belief. Their approach, how they establish that belief. One could be just reciting, affirming, declaring Allah transcendent above, resembling the creation, and having a modality. That's one way. Another way is to go in detail to establish that point. There are two different approaches, but all of them, according to traditional Sunnis, is the way of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And the scholars who blame Kalam, they were talking about that which led to deviant ideas like al-Mu'tazila, al-Jahmiya, al-Qadariyya, al-Mujassima, Mushabbiha, when it leads into all that, because they saying, listen, once we got the sound belief, we don't need to go into all that. So it's just approaches. Keep that in mind. Go ahead.
Now, Ahmed used to hate the way of speculative theology or ilm al-kalam as a method for clarifying the truth, and he used to
read that again. Now, Imam Ahmed ibn Hanbal, and the Hanbali scholars who followed them, who were on his way, not those who went to extremes into anthropomorphism or likening Allah to creation, because there's an extreme among those Hanbalis who went to an extreme because of that. We're talking about what Imam al-Subki called Fudala'u min al-Hanabila. Al-Fudala'u min al-Hanabila, those virtuous people among the, we're talking about that. What did it say?
Now, Ahmed used to hate the way of speculative theology or ilm al-kalam as a method for clarifying the truth.
Now, what was his issue? We don't use that. Just recite what Allah said. His messenger said, declare Allah free from the creation and stop. All that extra stuff y'all doing, don't do that. He didn't like it. Why? Because it was leading to people getting confused and deviated if it wasn't necessary. You're going to find in some cases when it was necessary, Imam Ahmed himself did detailed interpretation, and we'll prove that as well.
And he used to prefer stopping at where the Salaf stopped.
Where did the Salaf stop? They stopped at reciting and leave it. And I'm going to show you. Go ahead.
This is undoubtedly the truth as long as there is no pressing need for speculative theology or ilm al-kalam.
Let's stop right there. We'll stop right there. What page are you on?
33.
This is a beautiful book. Subhanallah. What is it?
Page 33 in the middle of the page.
Okay, Tajuddin Subki. Now I want to show you something. The reason why I'm asking for the pages because I'm following in the original book. That way we correct if there's mistakes in translation and or editing mistakes or typographical errors. We can fix them as we go along. Hold on one second. I want to show you something. Just to show you, so read the last line again that you read. Imam Ahmed.
Now, Ahmed used to hate the way of speculative theology
Imam Ahmed radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Just out of respect. I understand what they got in the book, but Imam Ahmed, meaning Imam Ahmed ibn Hanbal.
Now, Imam Ahmed ibn Hanbal, rahimahullah, used to hate the way of speculative theology, ilm al-kalam, as a method for clarifying the truth, and he used to prefer stopping at where the Salaf stopped.
Right. So that's his preference. Let's get some examples of that. This is the book Al-Asma wa Sifat, written by Al-Hafiz Al-Imam Al-Bayhaqi, where he talks about the names and the attributes and the statements of the Salaf. On page 406, he relates in Hadith 747, with his chain of narrators to Sufyan ibn Uyayna. Sufyan ibn Uyayna was among the great scholars of the followers from the Salaf. He was the scholar of Hadith in Mecca. He was the Sheikh of Imam al-Shafi'i, right? So he was from the Salaf. He said, from the route of Ishaq ibn Musa al-Ansari called, Samitu Sufyan ibn Uyayna يقول ما وصف الله تبارك وتعالى به نفسه في كتابه فقراءته تفسيره ليس لأحد أن يفسره بالعربية ولا بالفارسية. Look what he said. He said, Imam Bayhaqi, with his chain of narrations, up to Ishaq ibn Musa al-Ansari, who was the student of Sufyan ibn Uyayna, he said, I heard Sufyan ibn Uyayna, the great scholar of Mecca, in the time of the Salaf, the followers of the followers, the Sheikh of Imam Shafi, that's Sufyan ibn Uyayna, he said, whatever Allah described, Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, described himself with it in his book, its recitation is its explanation. It is not for anyone, it's not allowed for anyone to explain it in Arabic or in Persian. That was their approach. ما وصف الله تبارك وتعالى به نفسه في كتابه فقراءته تفسيره ليس لأحد أن يفسره بالعربية ولا بالفارسية. That's the approach of the Salaf. Whatever Allah described himself in his book, recited, that's the explanation, its recitation. Don't explain it in Arabic, don't explain it in Persian, and of course, definitely not in English, right? So they knew other languages. He mentioned it. Don't translate the Quran. Don't translate Allah's attributes. That's Sufyan ibn Uyayna, right? Go to another narration. Al-Bayhaqi mentions it in another narration, a different narration of the same point on page 514. Al-Bayhaqi mentions from another student of Sufyan ibn Uyayna, his name Ahmed ibn Abil Hawari. He said, سمعت سفيان ابن عيينة يقول كل ما وصف الله تعالى من نفسه في كتابه تفسيره تلاوته والسكوت عليه. He said that Sufyan ibn Uyayna said, everything that Allah described himself with it in his book, its explanation is its recitation and remaining silent about it. That's the Salaf. That was what Imam Ahmed was talking. What is the dalil of that? When the scholars of the science of hadith, they tell a story about Imam al-Shafi'i. They said that Imam Ahmed came to Mecca, and at that time, the great scholars like Sufyan ibn Uyayna, all of them were there, and the other great scholars. And Imam Ahmed, he used to go to the session of Imam al-Shafi'i. So his companions, they were looking for him in the sessions of those great scholars. When they found him in the session of this young man, they said to him, you leave the session of these great scholars in Mecca, like Sufyan ibn Uyayna and all of those people, and you go to sit in the session of this young Muttalibi boy. Muttalibi is the tribe of Imam Shafi, right? Who Al-Muttalib was the brother of Hashim, and Hashim was the father of Abdul Muttalib, who was the father of Abdullah, who was the father of the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Because we know the Prophet is Muhammad ibn Abdullah ibn Abdul Muttalib ibn Hashim, right? And Hashim's brother is Al-Muttalib, the great grandfather of Imam Shafi. So he said to him, do you leave the session of these big scholars and you sit in the session of this little Muttalibi boy? He said, Imam Ahmed responded, if you miss a narration at a short chain, you will get it at the long chain. So if there's a narration from a higher scholar and with a shorter chain to the Prophet, if you miss that, you can get it at the next rank from another scholar. The point is to get the narration. He said, but if I miss the mind of this Muttalibi, this young man, I don't know where I'm going to find it to the day of judgment. Ahmed was following a Shafi who was the student of Sufyan ibn Uyayna. That's his chain to Sufyan ibn Uyayna, right? And that was his position. And that was the position of Imam Ahmed. As Imam al-Bayhaqi mentioned in his book. And there is the quotes right there. That's the first one. And this is the second one, right? So that was the approach of the Salaf. And so to go, and I'm going to tell you why, just as a note, why those that unlearned young Wahhabi person who's coming back to Atlantic City with the Wahhabi fitnatul Wahhabiyah in a modern form, that's why they don't want to have a discussion, because they know we're going to whip out the books on them and smash those deviant ideas. That's why he's telling y'all, we don't debate with the deviant people. We know our religion, let them go search for theirs. No, the real reason is we're going to open up the books of the Salaf, and you're going to be in trouble. And you know that. So it's easier to hide. It's easier to misguide the uninformed. But I'll say this to Marquez, so-called Ahlus Sunnah of Atlantic City, and their leader, the misguided Wahhabi, young brother whom I love, but he is a misguided Wahhabi, Abdul Sami Gardner. You can hide all you want. There's going to come a day when we're going to be in a public session to discuss, and you're going to be exposed. Not because we don't love you, but we are not going to let Wahhabism spread in Atlantic City without a voice. It's not happening. Not on our watch. So we invite you again. Since y'all want to open up and y'all want to cause fitna and act like you're not causing fitna, we're going to expose you. We'll do it with brotherly love, because we do love you and we want good for you. We're not like you. I'm not going to call you a deviant. I'm not going to lie on you. I'm not going to make stuff up about you. I'm going to address you with love, with truth, and let's open the books. That's it. And all of y'all who are listening and following that, listen, it's easy to be in the gym and punch the bag and act like you can beat Floyd Mayweather. It's a whole different thing when you actually step in that ring. You look good hitting the speed bag, punching the heavy bag. That stuff look good. When you get in the ring and then someone is throwing blows back, because the speed bag don't punch back and nor do the heavy bag. But when you actually get in that ring with a skilled fighter, it's going to look totally different. That's an analogy. So it looks good reading Bin Baz books, reading Fawzan books, reading Ibn Abdul Wahhab books. That stuff look good. Reading Muhammad Amin al-Jami, reading those books, quoting, that stuff sounds good to someone who don't know. We're going past those books. We're going to the books of the Salaf. We're going to the books of the people of Hadith. And if you're following the way of the Salaf, you should be excited to just read the books of the Salaf. Just talk about the books of the Salaf. Not in a debate. You should be happy that someone's going to sit down and open up the books of the Salaf. It's not about winning. It's not about losing. It's about establishing the truth. And I would prefer this. I will just show you the books. You're a graduate from the University of Medina. You have the ability to read. Not like before. I remember you said I couldn't read Arabic. You couldn't read Arabic. I remember those days. That ain't the time no more. Now you've been trained. They gave you a certificate. You graduated from the School of Arabic. You are a graduate from the College of Hadith. This is your field. I'll just put the books in front of you to make it easy. I'll just show you the pages. I'll show you the quotes. I'll show you the statements, and I'll let you explain. we'll have a session just with you explaining. All I will do is show you the books, and you can verify where I'm mistaken. I don't have to go back and forth. All I would do, Al-Kitab Al-Asma wa Sifat, Sharh Sahih Muslim An-Nawawi, Fathul Bari, Ibn Hajar Al-Asqalani, and so forth and so on. Here's the books, here's the books, here's the books, and I'll show you and show you and show you and show you. And let me see what you say. That's easy. All right? You don't got to worry about a debate. There's no debate. You're going to be the main speaker. You'll be the one explaining, translating, so you cannot say it's me. I'll be the one who's just searching. Whatever it takes to clarify the truth. So it's not a competition. You're the graduate. You learn. They stamped you. You should be able to research. You should be able to understand. Let's go. And if nothing, so we don't cause fitna in Atlantic City. We got the books. You got books. You saying you're following the Salaf. We say we follow the Salaf. And obviously we don't agree. So let's clarify it for the people. You and me, we know each other. There's no real hostility, right? So we can sit down. You're a leader. You're a teacher. I'm a leader. I'm a teacher. Why can't we sit down and discuss the issues? It ain't like we only got 48 blocks. So we're going to crash if we don't sit down and talk. So everyone who keep, acting like it's fitna, it's not fitna, let's sit down and talk, right? You already making videos, you're doing it, let's sit down and talk. I'm not going away. I'm not going to go away. I'm going to address it. So we can make it easy. We don't got to draw it out. We can sit down like brothers and we can just have the issue, no argument. I'm telling you, I don't got to talk. All I do is point the books. You can do all the reading. You can do all the translating. You can do everything. And I say that because I don't want fitna. But I'm not going to allow anyone to misguide people, and I know they're being misguided. And I wouldn't want nobody to do that to me, and I wouldn't do it to nobody else. May Allah make it easy. May Allah grant us victory for all of us in following the truth. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Barakallahu fikum. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.